Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley joins me now. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Good to be back.
So from where you sit and from your positions on committees like the Intelligence Committee, you're watching the Iran war very closely. Do you believe that a retaliatory strike by the U.S. tonight, if it goes forward, would change the stalemate in any way with Iran, measurably move the war in the direction of the U.S.?
Look, the regime has a resolve here. As evil as they are, what this conflict has done is embolden them. I think what people don't understand about Iran and their regime is the last thing they want is reapproachment with the rest of the world. You know, beyond their few allies like China, their regime succeeds as sort of us against the rest of the world. So the conflict has probably emboldened them. It's weakened them temporarily militarily, but it's, you know, this is an army of 1.5 million people that can be restocked, restored, especially if they get help from others. And at this point in time, an escalation is probably not in their best interest, but it's certainly not one in which they're going to back down and say, oh, please, can we go to the bargaining table? That hasn't been borne out in all the months of this conflict.
There have been so many stop and start votes regarding limiting the president's war powers here. Of course, they're going nowhere. I just wonder, in your view, do you believe that congressional oversight of the president's war powers, whether this president or any president, is effectively broken? And would a Democratic majority Congress, if you're to win the House, perhaps the Senate, propose new legislation to correct that?
In the final analysis, when the Democrats do get back the House and hopefully the Senate, they'll have control of the appropriations, and that will be the, at least break that allows Congress to reassert its authority. But for way too long, Congress hasn't asserted their constitutional authority. Presidents have routinely violated. This president has taken it to an extreme. Unfortunately, there's just a handful of Republicans willing to stand up to the president. At what point do they change their minds? Perhaps as the midterms get closer. They can read polls just as well as anyone, and the fact that two-thirds, three-quarters of the American people disagree with this, and they realize that this war isn't just costing the tragedy of American lives. $70 billion appropriated already by Republicans for this war, and they see everything costing more because of it, because so many things come through the strait, and the energy costs go through this economy over and over again.
Iran is now saying that if the Strait of Hormuz were to return to normal operations, Iran would not have achieved its war aims. Does that communicate quite clearly that Iran intends to maintain influence over the strait and believes it has the leverage to do so?
Yeah, and perhaps tragically, we may have taught them that they have that leverage. And as we've seen, it doesn't take a large Navy for them to do that, right? This can simply be, as we have witnessed, drone attacks. So for de minimis cost, the Iranians can at least make shipping very, very difficult and costly. And as a result, have an extraordinary effect on the economy. And as Americans need to appreciate the fact and remind themselves, when the conflict started, the strait was open. What we've lost in tens of billions in cost in human life and a dramatic cost to the economy will be a net loss to the United States. The original purposes, as stated and often changed, regime change, simply, unfortunately, not going to happen. This is about obliterating the nuclear program or making them decide to go to the table to cease it. That's not working either. So in the end, we've got to ask ourselves, what are we doing this for?
Big picture question here. In terms of weapons shortages, particularly magazine depth, as they call it, in air interceptors, but also weapons like Tomahawk missiles, et cetera, has the Iran war left the U.S. strategically vulnerable in Asia and elsewhere around the world?
I think the best way that I can state it is that this is becoming an area of concern. And obviously, conflicts conflate, areas of concern conflate. How the U.S. reacts in one theater impacts how the rest of the world looks at that. The fact that we have not helped Ukraine in the manner in which we should have, we have been tentative, sends Beijing a message, and the fact that we are depleted is an advantage to our adversary, and a great concern, not just cost. The fact that President Zelensky was in town asking for more help, and that was almost, I'm not in the meeting, but I'm almost certain it was about air defense.
Yeah.
So in an illegal war with very little purpose at this point in time, we're making ourselves less safe across the world and hurting our allies, principally in the most important conflict in Europe since the Second World War, Ukraine.
To that point, we were meant to speak to the deputy mayor of Kyiv, but we just were told that he has to seek shelter. As expected, as the Ukrainian president had warned, Russia appears to be attacking the Ukrainian capital once again here. Where is Ukraine left, right? Even if President Trump wanted to give or delivered on promises to give additional air defenses, not clear that the U.S. has enough in reserve to do so. And it's going to take some time for Ukraine to manufacture its own, even with U.S. licenses. Where does that leave them in the meantime? Are they effectively sitting ducks, right, to these Russian attacks?
Well, to an extent, they're in far greater peril than they were. I mean, the damage was done in the early months of the Trump second administration when he didn't do another supplemental, when he criticized Zelensky, when he, in a sense, made it sound like there was a moral equivalency in this conflict. He's still never chosen who he wants to win. And if the president, besides meeting with Zelensky and a fair weather friend saying that they're doing better, a big difference from 17 months ago, what he said, you know, he would have seized Russian assets in the U.S. and used those to help build defenses for Ukraine. He would have signed on to sanctions that have real teeth. There's a bill that's going to be before him very soon to do that very same thing. But again, Putin understands strength. That is it.
Yeah.
He doesn't see it in Trump, especially when it comes to this conflict. If he would have helped sooner, this would have helped. The Ukrainians can still win this, and certainly not let Russia win. But the extraordinary damage that's taking place was unnecessary.
Congressman Mike Quigley, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.